Is Chuba Hubbard prime for a breakout season in 2024? We'll talk about that right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you right now 3 days a week as we are in off-season mode starting on July 15th. We'll be back to your team every day, which, of course, is our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Day 2 of our offseason positional breakdowns on Tuesday. Broke down Bryce Young and the quarterback room here in Carolina today. Going to break down the running back room heading into the 2024 season as we're about 5.5 weeks away from the team reporting here in Charlotte for the first time ever for training camp for Dave Canales' debut season as the Carolina Panthers head coach. Starting off with the top player, the biggest story about that player, and I know Jonathon Brooks clearly was the biggest offseason acquisition for the running back room for the Carolina Panthers. And drafting him in the second round is significant. I believe when he is healthy that he is going to be a big part of this offense. Now, we're just got to wait to see when is that going to be. Ian Rappaport, after he was drafted, said that July 1 was when he should be cleared, had a clean tear of the ACL. But then last week, during the end of mandatory minicamp, Dave Canales said he still has a bit of a ways to go. So he'd be ready for training camp. That still is something that will be determined in about a month's time, as on July 19th is when he has to report as a rookie. They'll do a physical, figure out whether he is good to go. But right now, clearly the man atop the depth chart is Chuba Hubbard, and rightfully so for what he did last season as a Panthers running back. Chuba has gone from being the fill-in for when Christian McCaffrey got hurt back in 2021 to being running back 2 with Deontay Foreman taking over as a lead back when McCaffrey was traded to San Francisco in 2022 to earning the RB1 job last year when Miles Sanders did not live up to the contract and the expectations that Frank Reich, Deuce Staley, and the rest of the offense coaching staff had for him last year. So Chuba, he has earned this opportunity to be the lead back in Carolina here in 2024. Last year, 238 carries, 902 yards, a career high, 5 touchdowns, 3.8 yards per carry. Looking at Pro Football Reference, he had a 47.5% rushing success rate. Over at Pro Football Focus, his overall grade was 77.2, which was 16th out of 59 qualifying running backs. Run grade was a 79.4, 14th out of 52 running backs that qualified. And his receiving grade, an area where we have really judged Chuba harshly since he stepped into the league here in Carolina. And understand, too, we were watching Christian McCaffrey, the best receiving back in the league, when Chuba came into the league to play here in Carolina at a receiving grade of a 62.1, 28th out of 56 qualifying backs, 36.4 receiving success rate, according to Pro Football Focus. And he played 59% of the snaps last season, being the Carolina Panthers' top back. I'm excited to see what he's able to do this season. And knowing that Dave Canales, the new head coach here in Carolina, has said multiple times that they're going to be stubborn about running the football, even if Jonathon Brooks comes back healthy to start off training camp, Chuba's going to get his opportunities. And I think he's going to get enough opportunities to be a 1,000-yard back. When you look at last season, 238 carries isn't really that much in the NFL today. And a lot of times, too, teams like to rotate their backs. So it's possible that Chuba gets more carries than he got last season, especially in an offense that, from all inclinations, is going to be a run-first offense. Last year, they want to be pass-first. And they ran a lot of 11 personnel, and they wanted to lean on Bryce Young and his arm. And we saw that that did not work out based off of Bryce Young's own inefficiencies, but also the offensive line's ability to hold up and the receiver's inability to get open. And then when they got open, to catch the ball and then to do something with it after the catch. This is not going to be a pass-first offense. And you look at Seattle, Dave Canales may be an offensive guy, but Pete Carroll was his mentor. And Pete Carroll, defense first, running the football, playing complementary football. That's what they wanted to do. And my expectation from a guy who has brought a great attitude, great energy to Carolina, and who has also stated countless times, we got to get our football right. I'm thinking he's going to want to lean on the run game, and the guy he's going to lean on early on this season, whether Brooks is ready to go or not, is going to be Chuba Hubbard. I don't know if he's going to be a workhorse for the Panthers. Before they brought in Brooks, it felt like that was going to be the case. Now Brooks in here, Chuba to me, clearly RB1 right now. And then Brooks eventually will probably be that 1B once he gets healthy. And we'll see how quickly he can get up to speed. But the first 5, 6, maybe half of the season, it's going to be Chuba Hubbard as the lead back, I would think, in Carolina until Jonathon Brooks really gets up to speed. Because he's missed. Here's the thing. He played really well at Texas last year. Tore his ACL late in the season. We saw with Austin Corbett, different situation as far as an offensive lineman, weighs a lot more, what's expected out of him at that position compared to what's expected out of Jonathon Brooks at his position as a running back, and also being not as heavy. And that's a lot to do on a knee when you have 325 pounds, however big Austin Corbett is. It's a little different situation. And then you also have a rookie coming into the league who was not there for rookie minicamp, was not there for the voluntary minicamp, was not there for any of OTAs on the field or for mandatory minicamp, and may not be ready to go for training camp. It's going to take him some time to get ready to go. And I'm still a firm believer that when he is ready to go, they're going to utilize him, because they did not give up what they gave up to the second round to get a running back without having high expectations. I'm sure you saw Panthers Blueprint episode 2, where they talk about just how much they love Jonathon Brooks. I think they also do love Chuba Hubbard. And when they decided Miles Sanders, and this is a different coaching staff, but still, Dan Morgan was in that organization last year when Miles Sanders did not play well enough, and Chuba was, and he was healthy, and he ascended to that top role. They went to the offseason believing, like, this guy can be someone good for us this year, and even adding another back, that's part of the plan. This is an organization that values running backs. We have seen that by paying Sanders, by trading back up into the second round to get Jonathon Brooks, and by keeping Chuba Hubbard around to be their lead back heading into training camp. So I think this could be a breakout season for Chuba, and it'll be well-deserved. The guy has worked his way to the top of the depth chart, and even after drafting somebody who, yes, will play a significant role in due time, Chuba should also play a significant role in the ground game on this offense here in Carolina this upcoming season in 2024. So excited to see what he's able to bring to the table. What about the rest of the depth chart? Where does Miles Sanders stack up? Rashad Penny, what role may he play here in 2024? Let's talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With Carol last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. And a big shout-out to Game Time. This past weekend, I was in Omaha for the College World Series. First time ever getting out there, and boy, was it a great experience. If you love baseball, if you love sports in general, get out there, especially first weekend where you got all 8 teams. It's Father's Day weekend, and I used Game Time to get some great deals on the game I went to on Friday in Virginia, and the game I went to on Saturday when NC State played Kentucky. And you can set the 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Heading into training camp, Chuba Hubbard is the top dog atop the Carolina Panthers running back depth chart, and we'll see how that shakes out as the season goes along, but I believe it could be a breakout season for Chuba in his final year as a Panther, potentially. You know how I feel about running backs, federal minimum wage only, no overtime, no holiday pay, use them, abuse them, then lose them. This is a guy who's also entering into a contract year, and contract years typically can be undefeated for players in Chuba's role. So excited, truly, to see what he's able to do, but also interested to see how the rest of this running back room shakes out. The way I see things heading into training camp next month, Jonathon Brooks would be RB2. Eventually, I think he'll be kind of that 1B to Chuba Hubbard's 1A, or vice versa. We'll see how that works out. The Panthers gave up some significant capital to get Jonathon Brooks. They had traded back after getting Xavier Legette. They were sitting there at 39, decided to trade back into the second round. Then when they saw Jonathon Brooks still sitting up there, moved back in there to pick 52. And they traded pick 52 rather to get to 46. And then they pick 142 that they got from the Dennis Daly trade from Tennessee a couple years ago. They traded that away. And then the pick that they received from the Rams, who were desperate to get into earlier on in the second round, they also gave that away. So gave it. The Dennis Daly basically helped you get Jonathon Brooks. Now, getting a running back early in the second round was something I was not necessarily expecting, and not necessarily something I love in principle. But I do like the player himself, and Jonathon Brooks did not get that many opportunities early on in his career at Texas. 51 attempts in his first 2 seasons. Why was that? Well, he's playing behind Bijan Robinson, who's down in Atlanta, former first-round pick last year out of Texas. Roschon Johnson up there in Chicago with the Bears. 2 NFL backs. Going to likely keep you out the field there in Austin. But when his time did come, which it did last year, he was outstanding. 1,139 yards, 6.1 yards per carry, 10 touchdowns. And here's a big thing that Dave Canales and his coaching staff and his front office in general loves about Jonathon Brooks and what they saw out of him at Texas last season, his versatility. 25 receptions, 286 yards, and a touchdown, all that coming before his torn ACL injury at the end of that season. And he was really a key part of that Texas offense. A lot of those guys have gone on to get drafted, as we know. We saw Xavier Worthy get drafted there in the first round. A.D. Mitchell, Jatavion Sanders, of course, is here in Carolina. Jonathon Brooks was arguably the most important player on that offense this past season. And if you go back, we talked to Jonathan Davis, the host of Locked On Longhorns. You go back to that Sugar Bowl where they had a fumble in that game. You wonder, Jonathon Brooks is healthy. Does Texas on the football? Does Texas end up winning that football game against Washington in that Sugar Bowl? We'll never know, but he's going to bring versatility. But we're going to have to wait and see whether he's able to be a factor once training camp opens and the preseason begins, really when the season gets going. He'll have to report on July 19th. July 1 is when Ian Rappaport said the day he was drafted, moments right after, that he is on track to be ready then. Dave Canales said a little bit of ways ago, just last week. So TBD on how all that pans out, but I do think that in due time, Brooks is going to be a big part of this offense, like the last year, Chuba Hubbard, likely the last year of Miles Sanders. So at the very least, beginning next season and for the next 3 years after that, and maybe even beyond, if the same coaching staff and front office sticks around, he will be the lead back in Carolina as long as he leads or lives up to all the expectations that are being placed upon him this offseason, and with the team giving up what they gave up to move up into the second round to pick him at 46. Miles Sanders, we have had conversation about him all offseason long and whether he would return to Carolina. Would he be somebody that they would try to cut? And fortunately for him, he had a $2 million roster bonus that the Panthers really couldn't get rid of him, and they would have lost $2 million against salary cap had they decided to cut him back in March. Now, post-June 1, which is where we're at, still they saved $200,000 to get rid of him. And at this point in time, you might as well just keep him. And he doesn't have a trade value. I know a lot of people have asked me that. What's Miles Sanders' trade value? What would be the trade value for a player who signed a 4-year, $25.4 million contract with $13 million guaranteed, then had 432 yards and a touchdown and average 3-point yards per attempt? What trade value would you have for that kind of player? Okay, again, yes, so none. You would have to give up assets to get rid of someone on that contract, still guaranteed money, who gave you those results in his first season. I'm just curious to see where he's going to play and where he's going to fit in this offense, knowing that Hubbard is a top back and that Brooks is versatile. And Sanders, there was a hope that he could be that, but he really hasn't been a versatile receiving back since his rookie year in Philadelphia. Going deeper into his numbers last year, rushing success rate was 40.3%, the lowest of his career. His PFF overall grade was a 60.8, 54th out of 59 running backs that were qualified. 27 receptions, 154 yards, 65.9 catch percentage. That's kind of nice, but a receiving success rate of only 39.0. Just a rough season for Miles. And the guy that brought him in here is Deuce Staley. That was his running back coach for a time in Philadelphia. And Frank Reich also dates back to Philadelphia as well. Miles Sanders, those guys are the ones who valued him, and they're not here anymore. And we've already seen what Chuba did to take over his role last year and bringing in Jonathon Brooks, and even the addition of next guy we're going to talk about. I think he may be safe, but I just don't know how much we're really going to see out of Miles. They can talk about how much they love Miles. Well, let's be honest, y'all. You didn't bring in Brooks to play behind Miles Sanders this season. Rashad Penny, a former first-round pick out of San Diego State who has battled through injuries throughout his career, played in Seattle with a lot of guys on his coaching staff. Of course, Dave Canales to be the prime one as the head coach, and never put up the kind of numbers that the Seahawks, a run-first type of offense, were hoping that he would put up. Last season, he spent in Philadelphia, only played 3 games, rushing for a grand total of 33 yards, played only in 18 games the past 3 seasons. So that's 18 out of possible 51 games. Career high games played was back in 2018 when he was a rookie in Seattle, just to illustrate how he has just not been healthy. And when you think special teams, because if you're going to be the fourth back of the team, you got to be able to play special teams. He has 11 career kick returns. Those came in his rookie season and his second year in the NFL. When he was brought to Carolina, I think a lot of people kind of raise their eyebrows about, oh, is this a Miles Sanders replacement? Don't see how he can be a Miles Sanders replacement when the Eagles didn't value him last year. The Seahawks have let him go. And at no point has Rashad Penny had a season better than Miles Sanders, or that has even been as high statistically as Miles Sanders' highs has been. Miles Sanders had a bad year last year. The year prior, he's a Pro Bowler. Rashad Penny, never been a Pro Bowler, hasn't been able to stay healthy. I just don't see him having that big of a role in Carolina or really even making the team. Raheem Blackshear, he has been a special teams player for the Panthers last couple of years. Look at his 2 seasons. He's only had 37 carries, 123 yards, and 3 touchdowns. 16 receptions, 138 yards also in those 2 seasons. 35 career kick returns so far as a Panther. 16 returns for 130 yards, 26.9 yards per return in 2023. That was the 6th most in return yardage in the NFL last season. And if he's going to make the team, it's going to be based off of his special teams prowess. It's nice that he can catch the ball in the backfield. That gives Panthers an option, especially early in the season. If Jonathon Brooks is not ready to go, you can have Raheem Blackshear play that role. And he did play a little bit later into the season last year, but again, different coaching staff, different offensive philosophy. We'll see how they value him once we get into the preseason and really get to see them playing some games. The other 2 backs currently on the roster, Mike Boone, 7-year vet out of Cincinnati, spent 2023 with the Houston Texans. He got 5 rushes for 23 yards, 7 receptions for 40 yards, played 44 special team snaps, 18% of the snaps that were available to him on special teams. That's what he played. And kind of like a guy in Rashad Penny, you're going to have to make the team via special teams. And Penny didn't really play that. Last season, Boone did. He maybe has a chance to be a special teams guy, but his numbers don't really suggest that he's going to be a factor in the backfield. And in the final guy, Jaden Sheardon, who is an undrafted free agent from Monmouth University, totaled 3,697 career rushing yards and 26 touchdowns, including 14 touchdowns of at least 50 yards. So this is a home run hitter coming out of Monmouth, set Monmouth's program record with an average of 7.3 yards per attempt and ranks 3rd in school history in rushing. And you're going to have that average of 7.3 yards per attempt when you have 14 touchdowns of at least 50 yards in 33 career games. Sheardon went over the 100-yard mark 17 times, including a program record 6 200-yard performances. Guy of the CAA. And if you watch FCS football, which I don't know how many of y'all do, but the CAA is basically like the SEC of FCS. Big Sky is also pretty good with a lot of the schools they have out there, but the CAA has traditionally had some strong programs like Villanova, that's won a national championship, Delaware, that's brought some pretty damn good players at the NFL, some really good programs there in the CAA, and he was able to tear it up there at Monmouth throughout his career. So that's the depth chart here in Carolina as far as the running backs go. So how many running backs going to make the roster? Looking at Tampa and looking at Seattle, there's a number in mind, but I do wonder if there are that many guys that are worth keeping here this upcoming season. We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. How many running backs will the Panthers keep? This is a team that says they're going to be stubborn around running the football. This is a team that says that they value the running back position, and that should be no surprise. Dave Canales has come over from Seattle. Dan Morgan also spent time in Seattle, and we have seen how the Seahawks love themselves some running backs and love to run the football. And personally, I'm old school, man. And think about it. The Panthers had some pretty damn good running backs. Go back to Stephen Davis, the season that he had back in 2003 when the Panthers went to the Super Bowl. And as great as Jake Delhomme was all season long, and of course, having Moose and Steve and Ricky, having a 1,400-yard rushing back who was healthy all season long, that was a big thing for that offense all year long. We know what Jay Stu did and what D'Angelo, Smash, and Dash, Christian McCaffrey, been some pretty good running backs here in Carolina. And I think that Chuba Hubbard has an opportunity to be one of those this upcoming season, but really in the future, Jonathon Brooks has a chance to do that, especially playing in an offense that will be running back friendly. Now, the best way to look at how many backs potentially will be staying here in Carolina once we have the initial 53-man roster cut down, and understand, initial roster is never finalized, not really until you get to the playoffs, and you got to make the playoffs to have that point in time where you have to say, these are the guys on our roster, these are the guys not on our roster. But until you get to that point in time, the roster, it is fluid. And just because a guy makes the roster on that Wednesday doesn't mean come Thursday, once the waiver wire is opened up, that he's still going to be on the roster. Because Panthers, especially this year, top waiver wire priority. Maybe they did not get the number one pick, but they do get that, thankfully. So looking at Tampa in Seattle, last year, Dave Canales was the OC in Tampa Bay. Now, I don't know how much of a say he got to have as far as when it came to the guys that were going to stay on the roster, but last year, the Buccaneers kept 4 running backs. Looking at Seattle last season, where a large portion of this offense coaching staff is coming over from this offseason, they also kept 4 running backs. So assuming the Panthers are going to keep 4 running backs, this is kind of how I see them tiered at this point in time. Chuba Hubbard, guaranteed a roster spot. He's your RB1. Jonathon Brooks, you didn't trade back up earlier into the second round to not keep him around on the roster. And then Miles Sanders, I think he's still guaranteed a spot. The contract, that's the reason he's still here. They say they love Miles. And I just look at the other guys available. I just don't see these other players really coming in and taking over his role. Last season was bad. I do wonder how healthy he was with the groin, which is something that limited him in the preseason. And I'm kind of in the thought process of you don't need to play your running back in the preseason, especially with a 17-game season and now how they want to utilize backs. I really don't need to see Chuba at all this preseason. Miles would be nice to give him some opportunities, as I don't expect him to be a guy who gets a lot of carries. But other than that, give the rest of those backs opportunities. Jonathon Brooks, I don't know if he'll be ready to go, but still, that's probably not a guy. Maybe a series, but really not a guy I want to see out there, especially if you're planning on using them a lot. There's no point in taking those unnecessary licks early on in August during the preseason when you want to be pretty run heavy. So Chuba, Jonathon, and Miles, those are the 3 guys I look at as being guaranteed to make the roster. You may argue against the Miles point, he's still here. And let's be real, who's taking his spot when it comes to the final 4 guys? Now, on the roster bubble, Raheem Blackshear would be the lone guy I see on the roster bubble right now heading to training camp. And it's based on really how are they going to go about special teams? And we're not going to talk special teams until the middle of July when doing these roster evaluations. And we'll get more in depth on that now. But now I'm just looking at Amir Smith-Marset, who's a wide receiver's punt returner last year. So I'm assuming he's probably going to be the top candidate to punt return this year. Xavier Legette, he's somebody that the Panthers likely are going to want to utilize as a kick returner. And especially with the new kick return rules they have in the NFL, he could be taking opportunities away from Raheem Blackshear. Raheem can be versatile as a pass catcher. He's been solid when he's got an opportunity to even run the football, but really he's here to play special teams. It just kind of comes down to the other returners and no more Chris Tabor. How does the new special teams coordinator in Carolina look at Raheem Blackshear and where does he factor in? So I have him on the roster bubble. So there's going to be 4 guys to make the roster. To me, it would be Chuba, Jonathon, Miles, and Raheem Blackshear. The other 3 I look at as practice squad guys. Rashad Penny really feels like that. When they brought him in, I don't think that he's making the roster. I don't think that he's better than any of the 4 guys I listed ahead of him. He's not going to play ahead of Hubbard. He's not going to play ahead of Brooks. I don't think he's going to play ahead of Sanders. And if he's not going to play special teams, which he really hasn't done, I just don't see how he has more value than Raheem Blackshear. But he does have value as someone who is going to know the offense, someone who's been around this offense coaching staff, and someone who can help bring in the new culture that they have. And Shaq Thompson talked about they've all gotten along, and he's really surprised by how quickly this team has come together, which is a great thing. And Dave Canales is just personality and his energy. I don't think that's that surprising that there is that energy flowing, and it's a new season, new hope, new coaching staff. All that also plays a factor into that. So Rashad Penny, he'll get his opportunities in the preseason, and I just think he's going to be a practice squad guy. Mike Boone, same case. If he's going to be around, it'll be as a practice squad guy. And then Jaden Sheardon. I would like to see Sheardon get the first opportunity as he's a younger back, put up some big numbers at Monmouth. And I'm excited to see what he can do in the preseason. When we come to the preseason games, we're not going to be seeing a lot of guys that are actually going to be impact players this season in a large portion of those games. We could see a lot of Jaden Sheardon, and I am very curious to see how he's able to run the ball. And also curious to see the guys they're blocking for him, like Cade Mays, Chandler Zavala, Nash Jensen, how they are progressing as offensive linemen. So I'm curious to see how that works out. But he's the guy I really look at as wanting him to be the first call as a practice squad running back of the remaining 3. It'd be him, then it'd be Penny because of his relationship, then Mike Boone. That's how I break it down. Chuba Hubbard, Jonathon Brooks, Miles Sanders, all 3 of those guys should be on the roster. I feel like they're guaranteed a spot. Roster bubble, Blackshear, just depends on what his special teams role is going to be. And then the other 3, Rashad Penny, Mike Boone, Jaden Sheardon, they are practice squad candidates. Guys are just, I can't see them making the roster right now. So we'll see how it shakes out here in Carolina once we start training camp, see the preseason, and get down to late August. But that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast for the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And be sure to tune in on Friday as we shift our focus to the wide receivers, the worst position group, arguably. You could say maybe it was quarterback, maybe it was offensive line. A lot of areas on the offense really struggled last year, but the wide receivers especially were disappointing. Going to break down Deontay Johnson, Xavier Legette, Adam Thielen, and the rest of the wide receiver core on Friday here on Locked On Panthers. So please stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole as always and forever. Keep pounding, and I'll talk to y'all on Friday.